and novels in the fantasy and science fiction genres. A fourth-year student at Florida Atlantic University, her major is computer engineering with a minor in Spanish. Nevertheless, her love for writing carries her into various English-related domains of academia at FAU and beyond. Since fall of 2023, Libby has supported ENC 1101 students in her role as a learning assistant. Academically, she writes and edits for FAU's undergraduate law journal, merging artificial intelligence and the law for her article in this year's publication. Creatively, she has been previously honored for her short story, A Ravine of Life and Perfectionism, in FAU's literary magazine, Coastlines. This is her first academic conference, and she cannot be more enthusiastic about working with eggs. Well, thank you, Libby. We are enthusiastic to work with you.
Thank you. Ada Coast sat cross-legged and comfortably on the side of the road, her father laboring over a large, shiny, blue machine a few feet from her. A3, her father's cobot, clumped around him, its little wheels squeaking with age. The sun warmed the colossal city of Nysa. In the distance, Ada observed tall skyscrapers of colored glass and steel gleam in the silver light. The tiny pinpricks of green that were the famed hanging garden rooftops of Nysa stood stark against the faraway cityscape. Private hovercraft flitted in and out of the beautiful buildings. Ada liked to imagine them as birds and the skyscrapers as giant trees. She imagined how the inner district would smell, flowers, or delicious food, or a summer breeze, and how it might sound. A pleasant mingling of hovercraft drums, the whisper of leaves and wind, children laughing. Ada yearned, not for the first time in her 14 years of life, most likely not for the last time, that only she could cross over to that part of Nysa, leap across the gaping ravine separating the outer levels from the inner, and experience it for herself. The chirp of a pigeon nibbling on moldy manna across the street brought Ada's mind careening out of her daydream, back to the gray, concrete, lifeless district she called home. This outer part of Nysa supported drumming power grids and chunky wires and paint-peeled hover trains, not plants or shiny glass towers or luxurious hovercraft. Currently, Ada stared at a near-empty street, occupied only by a group of brown-clad smart grid laborers on their way to work, a couple of bustling errand droids, her father, A3, and herself. She leaned against a wooden utility pole. It was the closest thing to a tree in this barren place, and by birthright, it was the least Ada deserved. She was a striking girl, Ada. Her unique parentage granted her unusual looks. Light brown skin, like the color of sapwood, hair that hung in dark ringlets, and bright green eyes. Even the sclera glinted green, the blood in them not the color they ought to be for humans. She shared only a passing resemblance to her human father, the man who raised her and held her and encouraged her. Ada assumed it was her mother she resembled most. Zophia's people were not human, but the last of the Dryads, ancient tree nymphs. Ada stared at herself in hologram mirrors every day, observing her strange green eyes an infinite number of times in her inhuman features. And still she could not fathom how the Dryads even existed, damned in this city without trees, in this world of humans and desecration. She could not begin to reckon her own relation to them, that their strange blood rivered through her veins. A sudden wind pulled Ada's hair, the strands sliding across her face. Something clunked against A3's metal frame. Ada glanced over, mildly intrigued, and saw to her disbelief an oak seed on the ground. Her father picked it up, handing it to her. Ada adored it in her palm, this capsule of life and lost lineages. The only living things she knew were humans and pigeons. Her home was concrete and metal, her ecosystem droids and cobots and automations, her food manna from the manufacturing district. Everything was a wasteland of life. And here, all of a sudden, brought by a mysterious wind, a pot of life. There was a barely audible crack, but in the quiet street, even A3's rusty old phone ears could pick it up. A flash of green, and then an unfurling of it, tendrils of plant matter emerging from the seed like a bird taking flight. There was a tugging in Ada's core, directed at the seed, calling her to it. She focused on the sensation. prodding it, expanding it. A sprout shot out of the seed, nearly taking her eye out. She shrieked and dropped it. As it fell, the sprout continued lengthening, brown bark replacing green flesh, so that even once it impacted the ground, it was still on level with Ada's hand. Her father pushed her away from it. A3 was stupefied. No AI databases in the world would have prepared him for that. Ada never took her eyes off it, watching it grow and grow even as her dad pulled her away. She willed it to stop, to relax. The sprout halted abruptly, almost as tall as Ada's shoulder. "What the? I think I did that," interrupted Ada, silencing her dad. "Look, and she squinted her eyes, concentrating on that sensation again. The tree began inching upwards once more. Her father gaped, awestruck. "A tree," said Ada, her voice breaking, tears forming. It was the first one she had ever seen. And her story began. Over the next half-decade, Ada snuck around to Nysa, planning and pushing and creating new trees whenever she could, wherever she could. Around utility poles and smart buildings so that workers might grant clean trees. She scaled buildings, her ladder the trees she grew from scratch, her motivation the dreary concrete that scraped her palms and knees. Nysa scientists investigated the explosions of trees, their results a mockery to them, their hypotheses squashed. Hologram posters popped up everywhere, broadcasting legislation banning the unauthorized planting of trees. District officials claimed the trees interfered with the sensors. Ada's father shook his graying head at this. He slaved over these sensors every day. He knew their limits, and trees were not among them. Ada continued her planting, heedless of the lying city officials, indignant to them. She crouched low, breathing her oak trees to life, spreading their seeds far, and watching the wind carry away their leaves. Once, she stumbled upon a tree she didn't plant. Minutes earlier, she had gotten too close to a smart sensor, tried too hard to grow a tree around it. An authority droid whirled around the corner. They were fast and near impossible to escape, authority droids, so she wasted no time before absolutely booking it. She used her trees to push forward through the streets, coming to a halt abruptly when she saw she was far enough away. She leaned against a concrete wall, panting, and that was when she saw it. In the dying light of the sun, a flash of motion drew her eye. She watched, puzzled, as an oak tree carried itself upwards. It was not one of her trees. It was different somehow, the bark slightly off, the leaves a little too large. It pushed higher before its momentum died out, the branches sighing softly in release. A dryad. A dryad must be close by, observing her. She looked around, her eyes hysterical, her breaths rapid. One of her mother's family members was nearby. The dryad was here, growing a tree before Ada the way the half-dryad had been growing trees for the past 5 years. Why wouldn't they show themselves to her? No dryad emerged. The only sound from them was the gentle swaying of the branches from the tree they left behind. Years passed without an answer, but Ada never stopped bringing nature to every crack in the concrete she found, planting trees in every breath she could spare, fighting the humans that forced even other humans into desolate wasteland as they watched from their stained glass palaces. Part 2. Zofia, 2 decades earlier. Life as a dryad had become like eternal winter for Zofia, a constant slumber, slow, torturous thoughts, nothing upon nothing. Dryads had been forced to adapt. Deforestation was a massacre Zofia could not even begin to comprehend and did not want to. Now they carried their trees in their rib cages, their constant companion, shrunken down to fit the flesh. Nature did not like this cage, even from its daughters. Zofia and her brethren hurt. They wheezed, but they survived. The last of them dwelled deep and dark in the ravine between Inner and Outer Nysa. The dryads acted as a group, their leader Dodonna directing their behavior, always vigilant for humans. Their green skin turned pale in the caverns, their chest trees withering. Zofia lounged as often as she could, following Dodonna's commands half-heartedly. That changed one day. Zofia could not stomach the dark anymore. Without seeking permission, she fled from the cave, scrambling out the mouth, the sunlight showering over her. It was a shot of ambrosia. It was heaven and hell all at once, overwhelming and not nearly enough. Without thinking of Dodonna or the other dryads, simply thinking for herself for the first time in a long time, Sophia began to stretch her tree, growing a sprout from her chest and using it to scale the steep cliff. She wanted up, 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 to soil, or if that was gone, scraped by the humans, then simply up. She could not bear the thought of returning to the dark. It would be a year before she returned, carrying her newborn child down that ravine, away from her lover, to meet Sophia's arboreal family. Her sisters glared in disgust. Dodonna was beyond livid, a picture of fury rivaling a thunderstorm. You have two choices before you, Sophia, she squeaked. Swear on your tree to never look at this child, never glance in her direction, give up her entirely to her father, or watch as I end her life. To break an oath of one's tree is death. It would grow from their chest, squeezing life from them for an oath broken. But Sophia would not watch her child be slaughtered as she had watched her sister slaughtered. She swore on her tree to never look upon her daughter after that day, forbidding herself from even glancing, and brought her back up to the world above, to the father Sophia chose, and to the human Sophia loathed. She called her daughter Ada. Years passed. Sophia hoarded the memory of her infant daughter, locking it away in the same place she kept her oak tree. Once, when it became too much, she tossed one of the seeds to the wind, praying it reached her little Ada. More years passed. She thought only of Ada, only how she wished Dodonna hadn't forced her hand. Only of Ada, only of Ada. She left the cave one day, never to return. It was not hard finding her daughter. Trees had blossomed around Nysa, oak trees. Sophia beamed, thinking maybe her seed had indeed reached her daughter. She pushed onto a roof for a better view, scanning the concrete streets and metal poles for a sign of life. And there she was. Ada panted against the wall, small roots of an oak tree curling at her feet. One of the humans' metal machines rolled past a few feet from her, blasting a siren Sophia was sure Ada had caused. Her little girl was breathtaking. Like Sophia, but her own person, not human or dryad, but something more, something better, something that wouldn't destroy the world, but wouldn't hide from it either. She was pure sunlight, pure love, and Sophia would do anything to observe her for just a moment longer. Something began to expand in her chest. Her tree. Her oak tree. It was growing, pushing out against flesh, tingling with the promise broken. Sophia did not care. She would look at her daughter for as long as she could. Dodonna could no longer control her. This was her choice. Life without seeing Ada was death regardless. She was perfect, Sophia thought. Utterly perfect. It was her last thought as branches unfolded from her skin, reaching for the sky, up and up and up, like a mighty green skyscraper. The end.